We sing now together our song of thanksgiving, rejoicing in the goods which the ages have wrought, for a life that enfolds us and helps and holds us and leads beyond the goals which our forebears once sought. We sing of the prophets, the teachers, the dreamers, designers, creators, and workers and seers, our own lives expanding, our gratitude commanding. Their deeds have made immortal their days and their years. We sing of community now and in making in every far continent, region, and land, with those of all races, all times and names and places. We pledge ourselves in covenant firmly to stand.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community Church. I am Miriam Epskamp, the Director of Religious Education for Children and Youth, and I'm happy to be your greeter this morning. All of our programs are virtual right now, but our building is on Shaver Road in Portage, Michigan, on the ancestral lands of the Peoria Potawatomi people. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. In fact, we had an opportunity to hear from one of the emerging elders recently. If you didn't have a chance to listen to Marcus Winchester from the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, I highly recommend it. You can check out the video recording of that service at our YouTube channel. I will put the link in the comments of this video. This is a community of seekers. We are on diverse spiritual journeys, but we're united by our shared values. In this congregation, we believe that love is love, that Black lives matter, that climate change is real, that no human being is illegal, and that all genders are good and whole and equal. We are on a mission to transform ourselves positively and the world. We welcome anyone who wants to join us on our journey. We are served most Sunday mornings by our minister, the Reverend G. Ludwig McCartney. Unfortunately, she cannot be with us today due to health reasons, but UUCC member and retired Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Harold Boy, has graciously agreed to fill in. Harold is learned and thoughtful, and we are grateful that he is willing to share his time and talents with us. If you're joining us for the first time on Facebook, we'd like to say welcome. You are more than welcome to join us in our Zoom room. You will find the link to join Zoom in the chat portion of this video. You can also learn about our Unitarian Universalist congregation by visiting our website at www.uucommunitychurch.org. You can find out about our programs for children and youth and other ways to connect with us during the week. I want to hold up two things that are happening soon that you might be interested in. This Thursday, December 10th at 7 p.m., it's the next installment of Moral Decision Making. It's our lecture and discussion series, and we're going to be talking about lying. There should be some interesting conversations. You're welcome to join us. And then a week later, on December 17th at 7 p.m., we have a special guest joining us, Marcel Price, he is the outgoing poet laureate of Grand Rapids. He's an activist, an author, a mental health advocate, and he works with children, helping them connect with creative writing and poetry and art. So it should be another great conversation. Visitors are always welcome to join our programs. Before we move on, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who is making today's service possible. The Reverend Harold Boy, our music director, Nick, our fabulous tech team, and you. Now, let us center our hearts and minds by lighting the chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Please join in as Kimberly says the chalice lighting words.
Please join me. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share.
Hello, friends. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you to share some of my thoughts. But I'd like to say that I'm saddened that my friend Reverend G is suffering. And let us take a moment to have thoughts of her and to hasten her recovery. So I'd like to begin by reading the Serenity Prayer, which was written by Reinhold Niebuhr, the theologian, in 1943 at the height of World War II. The original prayer is different from the one that we're probably most familiar with, the one that is used in Alcoholics Anonymous. It really, you might say, is a more Christian prayer, and there's actually a second part to it that people don't really use much, but it is very much a Christology kind of prayer, the second part. But this is what Reinhold Niebuhr originally wrote. God, give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things that should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. So notice that Niebuhr used the idea of grace, a religious term, and he talks about change what should be changed, which is not in the modern streamlined version that we just talk about changing what we can. And the point is that, you know, just changing things is not necessarily the best thing to do. You want to do what is right. But for now, I want you to just take a moment to focus on the word acceptance. That's what this sermon is about. And just to think for a moment, what do you think of when you hear the word acceptance? I like to preface this sermon by referring to the Johnson Amendment. What is the Johnson Amendment? I hear you ask. Well, I'm glad you ask. It was the amendment proposed and successfully passed in 1954 by the then majority leader of the Senate, Lyndon Johnson, which denies churches and other nonprofit organizations the benefit of tax exemption if they would endorse or oppose a political candidate. President Trump has since signed an executive order to the Justice Department saying that no one will be prosecuted under this amendment. You know, if you excuse me for a moment, I have a cat at the window and he's meowing, so I'll have to let him in and then I'll be right back. Sorry. that was a bit embarrassing, but he would just keep on meowing. And anyway, so so we have the Johnson Amendment, which denies tax exemption to churches and nonprofit organizations if they oppose or endorse a candidate. President Trump has since signed an executive order to the Justice Department saying that no one would be prosecuted under this amendment. Without going into the details about the issues of religious freedom, the prohibition for governmental establishment of religions, and taxation, the last of which is truly a muddled disaster, when millionaire preachers with jet planes pay not a penny in income tax, or corporations like Amazon pay less tax than you and me because they pay zero tax. Organizations like Scientology claim to be religions so that they don't have to pay taxes. But I bring this up only to say that I'll be talking about politics and be mentioning the names of certain political figures, most importantly, President Trump. And I do this because I cannot tell the story in any authentic way without doing so. Plus, I don't think that I'm violating the Johnson Amendment because I'm not endorsing or opposing any political candidate. I'm just talking about my story, which includes President Trump. It's like my saying I'm a Detroit Tigers fan, and my saying so, I'm not suggesting that you be one too. Besides, if I tried to hide the names of people, it would come off rather awkwardly, and you would already know where I stand. So let us begin. We gather here in the midst of troubled times. We're confronted with a mighty virus that affects us politically, and a mighty virus of tyranny and hatred that affects us spiritually. It's an ancient story that we human beings have faced before. And both of these infections are a body politic, can leave us confused, angry, afraid, and worst of all, despairing. Now, my wife, Julie, and I have been living well, not that much differently than before the virus, except I do hunger, perhaps more than she, for the physical presence of other people. But we know that there is real suffering out there. People are becoming sick and people are dying. And people have become unemployed, suffering from food insecurity, lack of money for medicines, and even homelessness. And then there is a sickness of racism that infects us all. Plus, there are worries of the degradation of our environment, especially the climate crisis. And what is more, even for the most fortunate of us, we have lived in a stressful time because of the ugly political climate. The last election by far has been the most stressful in my life. And the stress still continues because of President Trump's unwillingness to accept defeat. He claims voter fraud as if he were some political scientist and expert who's been studying our voter systems around the nation for decades. We all know that he just says there's voter fraud because it favors him. It creates a kind of narrative in which he does not have to see himself as the loser. That in and of itself would not be so serious, except so many people are enabling him in his fantasy. And I'm proud to say that our Republican Representative Fred Upton is not one of those enablers. But the well has been poisoned, and we will live with distrust and rage for a long time to come. Yes, these are troubled times. And for a sensitive, kind soul, it can be a personally anxious time. My hope here today is to reach out to all of you who may suffer from anxiety, rage, and despair, knowing that these emotions are hard to overcome and that we need to work together. We need to work together to keep our sanity. We need to focus on this present moment. It is important that we live in the here and now so that we can appreciate the beauty of creation and the joy of company, even the virtual company of our friends and family who give us joy and a sense of belonging in our lives. And it would be good that we find something to do that gives our lives meaning, which of course need not be employment for money, but something that is important for us to do. And it's important for us to have faith, not knowing that there will be a better day anytime soon, but that by doing what we think is right for us, that which gives our lives meaning will be enough. Each of us in our own particular way make the world a better place in which to live. In these troubled times, we're called upon to do the practice of forbearance. Now, on Tuesday, November 3rd, Election Day, I arrived at sorry, distraction. On Tuesday, November 3rd, Election Day, I arrived at 9 o'clock at the Kalamazoo Township Hall to work as a volunteer to process the absentee ballots. It was an arduous process indeed. Because of the COVID virus, of course, we all wore masks, and we had to provide our own food, which each of us would eat alone in a far corner of the room. We're not allowed to leave the room, but only to go, except to go to the bathroom. And we worked until 3:30 in the morning on Wednesday. It was clear that all of us were totally committed to create a fair and accurate count of all the votes. Around 10 p.m., an election official came to us who had been working the polls, and those polls closed at 8 p.m. His face was dark. He told us Trump had won the election. I asked him, did Trump win Pennsylvania? He said that was uncertain. And I said, well, we can't really say Trump won if he didn't win Pennsylvania. But though at 10 o'clock, it did look bad for Biden. And indeed, sometime after that, Trump declared victory. But my story is not about the election per se, but how the news about Trump winning had affected my coworker named Diane. She was devastated. We had developed a good rapport, and I wanted to comfort her. And my mind turned to Reinhold Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, thinking of the first part that he really originally wrote, God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed. I told Diana my idea about the Serenity Prayer, and I asked her, what did she think of when she heard the word acceptance? Diane thought about it for a moment, and then she said to me, at this time, I cannot think about acceptance. I cannot accept what I just heard. I understand what she was saying. I too was having a hard time accepting the possibility that Trump would be president for another 4 years. I mean, my God, wasn't the past 4 years stressful enough? But suppose he did win. Then what? If we do not accept, will our lives become miserable, full of anger, even hatred and fear? Would we be like President Trump as he has a difficult time accepting his defeat? I do get concerned when I hear my friends' voices of weariness. For example, after it was clear that Joe Biden had won the election, I had a conversation with my friend Richard in California. He surely did sound depressed, even though he wanted so very much for Trump to lose. But besides facing all the ugliness of the political turmoil and the virus hazard, he and his wife Cheryl have been locked down and were smelling the smoke from the fires that surround them. I ache to think of my beloved California on fire. So I can understand his depression. Again, I related the serenity prayer to Richard and asked him, what do you think of when you hear the word acceptance? He said, I think of defeat. Now that truly concerned me, and I told him so, and I was worried about him, and I cared about him. But then acceptance can be seen in that way, implying giving up. Sometimes we have no choice but to raise the white flag. For example, for as much as I've heard, for as much as I have a hard time accepting that 74 million people voted for Trump, and the majority of them believe that he lost illegitimately, that my lack of acceptance of that fact would not make them go away. But acceptance of this unpleasant fact does not mean that I cease to work for what I consider to be my mission of working to make our country a better democracy, where people of goodwill and good faith will work to practice compassion and religious tolerance. And we can do that no matter who is president or what other people think. Let us revisit the Serenity Prayer as Reinhold Niebuhr wrote it back in 1943 at the height of World War II. God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things that should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. So we are familiar with the streamlined vision, as I mentioned before, that's used in Alcoholics Anonymous, but we may miss the more deeper meanings of the original prayer. Elizabeth Sifton, the daughter of Reinhold Niebuhr, in her book, and this is her book, Serenity Prayer, Faith in Politics in Time of Peace and War, that she wrote in 2003. And she explores with us the meanings of that prayer that presents us with more questions and answers. This is what she wrote. What does it mean to ask God to grant one grace? What is this about? Amazing grace. Is it a freely given bounty of God's love bestowed on all his creatures, or does one have to prepare one's soul for it? And if so, how? And how do you know if it's been granted you? The Serenity Prayer presumes that it's hard to accept what cannot be changed. It reminds us of the human truth that no pain, death, or irreversible loss is easily managed. Yet acceptance must come serenely or not at all. Since anger or resentment hardens the heart, it makes acceptance impossible. On the other hand, all too many of us seem able, even ready and willing, to accept inhumane and cruel situations that we could ourselves do something to improve. Surely we should find it intolerable to endure them. If instead we find the courage to change what should be changed, how far will our decision take us? Do I act for myself or for my family, society, country? Does praying for the courage to make changes suggest that at morally ambiguous and dangerous junctures, let alone ordinary everyday ones, summoning up the strength to do this may require divine intervention? And then wisdom. The prayer says nothing about the moment of discernment when, if we are wise, we shall see which category is which. How do we tell? Most prayers thank the Almighty for having bestowed understanding, wisdom, and good fortune upon the faithful. But this prayer does not. This prayer asks only for wisdom to discern the right way on our own. It presumes that it has within our powers to accomplish this. It presumes that it has within our powers to accomplish this. In thinking about Diane and Richard, I know that I do not have all or even any of the answers that could assuage their anxiety and depression. All I can do is be there for them, to let them know that I care. And truly, just being with people in a meaningful way is often the best prayer a person can make. I want to leave you with a story from the book Lost Connections. This book right here. By Johann Hari, who was an English journalist and who suffered depression and anxiety for most of his life and was treated with Western medicine, that is with drugs, which helped him for a bit, for a time, but not permanently or completely. And thus he went on a journey of over 40,000 miles to meet with some of the most important social scientists and with people who have been through the depths of depression and anxiety and with people who have recovered. And what he discovered is that what he thought about depression and anxiety was mistaken, that the remedies for depression reside mostly in our relationships with other people and with our involvement in meaningful activity. I will share with you a much revised story from Hari's book that I found most compelling. In the summer of 2011, in a concrete housing project in Berlin, a 63-year-old woman in a headscarf forced herself to climb up from her wheelchair to stick a notice in her window. It explained that she was being evicted from her home from being behind in the rent. And so before the bailiffs could come exactly in 1 week's time, she was going to kill herself. She wasn't asking for help because she knew none would come. She just didn't want her death to happen without people knowing why. She told me later, she told Hari later, I could feel the end was coming. Nuri Sengiz, and I'm not sure if I pronounced her name correctly, barely knew her neighbors, and they barely knew her. The housing project where she lived was a neighborhood called Koti, which is Berlin's Bronx, the place middle-class parents told their kids to never go there at night. It was no place to live. The project was awash in anxiety and antidepressants. Now people started to take notice of Nuri, especially the other residents of the project, to identify with her plight. It seems that after the Berlin Wall had fallen and East and West Germany unified, that the project became a site of gentrification, and thus the sudden rise in rents. In time, the neighborhood would be demolished. Because it was originally a poor part of town before the wall came down, because it was right on the edge of the wall, and so there became a poor part of town. The people who became its residents were those who were shunned by the other Berliners: Turkish manual laborers like Nuri, left-wing squatters and rebels, and gay people. But Nuri's simple act set off a powerful community defiance in which the street was blockaded for 3 months, such that the powers that be could not evict people, let alone demolish the project. The blockade became organized in such a way that people would take shifts paired up randomly. In the middle of freezing Berlin, Nuri was in the street in her wheelchair. People were afraid to be outside in the dark in Koti, but she says, I have nothing to do. I have no money. If people want to kill me, then I'm dead. So it's nothing to worry about. Nuri was paired first with Tanya, a 46-year-old single mom with peroxide hair, a chest and arms covered with tattoos, and a miniskirt that she wears even in the German winter. Standing next to each other, they looked like a comedy duo, polar opposites of Berlin life: the religious Turkish immigrant and the German hipster. Even though they seemed so different, they discovered that they had something deeply in common, that they both were women on the run as teenagers. They were both young mothers. They became best of friends. In time, the residents found that had created a kind of family, these misfits, and they created a home, often for the first time in their lives. And also they were able to get some concessions from the power brokers such that they could still live in the project, that evictions would become rare, and that elected members from the project would be on the boards. But what made this story so fascinating to me is how when people came together in common cause, that their lives improved, regardless of the outcomes of their actions. As one protester named Sandy noted, before the protests, a lot of people were depressed. They pulled back on medication. They were sick, ill because of these issues. Nuri was so sick, she was going to kill herself. But then because of these protests, they became very political people again. It was therapy for us. And if you read the story, there's so many stories of the people involved in the blockade. And they talk how about their lives improved, how they became happier because they were involved in this project of blockading the streets. Now, I believe this story reflects the Serenity Prayer. People were facing the reality that their rents were increasing beyond their ability to pay. That they could not change right away. But what they could change was their response to the problem by organizing a blockade and making their plight known to the citizens of Berlin. Even though there was no guarantee of success, their actions coming out of courage gave them serenity. Those of us who are so much more advantaged than these poor people of the Cody Project can learn from them. We too can find our serenity when we accept reality, find our courage when we know what we should do, and find our wisdom when we know the difference. Go in peace, friends.
Man, it hurts sometimes to live this life. Some days I'd rather just run and hide. Maybe then the pain would hide as well. Maybe then I could protect myself. But who's gonna win? Is that really living? Oh, I wish I didn't know. But the answer is no, nobody would win. 'Cause I could close my eyes and pretend I don't see. I could close my mind and pretend that I'm free. But my soul knows the truth. Life means stepping back in. I'm gonna open my heart again. Man, it hurts sometimes when I've done wrong. Some days I'd rather just move on. Maybe then I wouldn't have to cry. Maybe then I could protect my pride. But who's gonna win? Is that really loving? Oh, I wish I didn't know that the answer is no, nobody would win. 'Cause I could close my eyes and pretend I don't see. I could close my mind and pretend that I'm free, but my soul knows the truth. Life means stepping back in. I'm gonna open my heart. I could close my eyes and pretend I don't see. I could close my mind and pretend that I'm free, but my soul knows the truth, that life means stepping back in. I'm gonna open my heart again.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
The closing words are by Theodore Parker, abolitionist Unitarian minister. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. So be it.